Okay. With all the stuff that has been happening with Elon ripping the wiring out of the U.S. government, I do not feel right in doing a traditional episode. This is not the opening sting. There will be no bumpers. This is just going to be me talking. It has, and I apologize for the delay in getting the episode out. It has taken me, I think this is attempt number 6 to get this right. Because, and this is nothing against any other podcast out there. If somebody has a gun to your head, you're probably not going to act the way you always do. You may pretend to act the way you always do, but you're gonna somehow signal to people that, hey, there's a problem. If you can. And, we all have to figure out our different ways to get through this. But I think that these times are so seriously dangerous that, for at least this episode, I can't do a traditional episode. And I apologize for that. But I hope you can understand. Because one of the things that I need to drive home to people who are listening to this is that these are not ordinary times, and we cannot expect things to go back to the way they were easily, if at all. I will say the following about stuff going around here before I go any farther. Some of the bills have started arriving from my time in the hospital. I have not looked at them yet. I will do it at some point here in the near future, but, I can't fucking pay them. I mean, if it was like $20, oh, sure, I could cover that easy, but, it's going to be in the thousands, so it's just like, yeah, fuck it. I'm in no hurry. They'll come after me sooner or later. I am, in general, feeling better. I still have to go see a doctor to handle a few minor things like my blood pressure and stuff. But I'm okay in that respect. Fuzznuts and Lord Squeakington are fine. I think, not Lord Squeakington, no. Lord Nibbler is fine. I think Lord Squeakington is no longer with us because I have not seen any sign of him at all. And I don't know how long. So, not really thrilled about that, but, I couldn't get him back in the house, so, whole lot of nothing I could do. The other big news is I'm back to riding the old bike because I blew a tire on my new bike. Of course, it was the rear one, which that was mounted on the bike at the factory, and I could not get the nuts loose so I could pull the wheel off. I knew at some point this would be an issue, and I had been trying, unfortunately unsuccessfully, to find replacement nuts. I have managed to find replacement nuts that I hope will work. But it took me all day with a fucking hacksaw to cut off one wheel, or the nut on one wheel. And it's gonna, and I haven't, there's, a nut on each side of the wheel, and I have not had a chance to tackle the other nut because the only times when I've been up and it's been daylight, the weather has been absolutely fucking shit. So that's no good. I can't. If it's 30 degrees or 40 degrees outside and it's pouring down rain, I can't do anything with that bike. And it's a little too heavy, I know, because I've tried for me to bring it inside the house to work on it. I mean, I can bring it inside the house, but not with a flat tire. And it is the rear tire, so. So I'm back on the old bike, which, other than being, other than topping out at less than, at half the speed of what the new bike goes for, it's not bad. The other thing that I need to mention is I am going to be putting out a lot more content that is only for the Patreon supporters and potentially a lot less content available to everyone. This is not something I really want to do. It's not something I'm doing lightly, but given the nature of where we find ourselves right now, I feel it is the best solution. I will explain more when I put out a Patreon-only members episode. And again, Patreon supporters, you're only going to get billed for 4 episodes. Well, 4.5 episodes, since some months have 5 weeks and some months have 4 weeks, so it averages out to 4.5 episodes a month. I will not bill extra for the bonus because I've been poor, and I will never forget I had subscribed to a podcast that put out an episode once a week, and then one month, they put out a couple of extra episodes and charged for them, and that really hurt me at the time when I could barely afford to support anyone. I should also point out that I knew the host of that podcast personally, and they knew that I was living on very thin margins. So, I would have thought that they would have kept to the normal pattern, because at this point I had been supporting their podcast for a couple of years, and it had always been, 1 episode a week. Great. I can afford that. And then one month it ticks up, and I'm like, ooh, I can't afford that. Yes, it was an extra $2 a month, and my margins were so thin that hurt me. If you have been paying attention to a lot of stuff in the news, you might have an idea why I would hesitate to put some stuff out there publicly. And I'm just going to say this. I can't, in good conscience, put out a standard episode, whether it's a news show episode or a Hexenhammer episode, and that be the sole part of my I have a platform, and I'm going to use it as best I can. But I'm also not going to put people at risk if I don't have to. So that's why some stuff's got to be behind the paywall. When I have time, may not be this week, as I have to work on Saturday, I will put out a Patreon only episode that explains everything in detail. But again, if you've been paying attention to stuff, you probably can guess some of it. Now, let me get to the reason why it has been so hard to put out this episode. There, as you well know, there's all kinds of fucking shit going on. And, you know, as I said earlier, Elon is basically going through the federal government, ripping out the wiring. Like somebody raiding an abandoned building to strip it of copper so they can sell that for money. And I have been turning over different ways to talk about this. I've written scripts. I've done off-the-cuff attempts. And it wasn't until I stumbled across an article, which will be in the show notes, that everything began to drop into shape for me as to how to deal with this situation that we find ourselves in. In his Adventures in the Screenwriting Trade, in his Adventures in the Screen Trade, William Goldman, who wrote the book and the screenplay for The Princess Bride, amongst a number of other very, very well-known movies, like The Marathon Man, and a whole shitload of movies that I can't remember now. Even if you haven't seen The Princess Bride, you've probably seen something that he's written or he's had a hand in. Anyway, he talks about a story needing a spine, and that when you find the spine of the story, you can tell it. And this article that I saw, again, linked in the show notes, gave me the spine I was looking for. Even though I will be referencing articles as we go through this episode that date from the mid-90s. And yes, they are very relevant to things happening today, even though it doesn't necessarily seem like it until you hear what the article's about. So, the article that gave me the spine was on Realtor.com. And it's about a doomsday bunker for rich people that has, spas and all this, luxurious stuff. It also has AI doctors. Now, I don't know how much you've been following the developments in AI, but despite what a lot of people will say, there are still severe limitations with what AI technology can do. Now, I will say that there is ample evidence if you constrain the database of a particular instance of an AI to one topic, you get better results than if you have an AI system that is allowed to access the entire internet. So, for example, if you have an AI system that is trained solely on medical journals and medical textbooks, you will get better medical results from that AI than you will from an AI that is trained on everything it can find on the internet. This is because the AI that is scanning the entire internet doesn't understand some of the shit out there is bullshit and should be completely ignored. And there are a number of examples where AI is able to figure out something from medical information that humans can't. For example, AI, an AI system that is only trained on medical data is, in a couple of different instances, has been shown to be better at detecting indications somebody has cancer better than a human, or it's been able to predict that, well, this person is more likely to develop cancer than this other person, when a human looking at that same data can't make that connection. So yeah, you can kind of get the idea that, hey, having an AI doctor may not be that bad. But I have to point out, because there's always a but, that you cannot just turn over your medical system to AIs, even if they're trained on medical data, because studies have shown you still need a human to verify the results, and you need human to properly deliver bad news. Right? I mean, and when I say bad news, it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you've got a fatal disease. It could be, hey, you've got this health problem. It's going to be really tough to deal with. It's going to be tough to treat. You may have to be on medication the rest of your life. You may have to have surgery. You want a person there who can, look at you and evaluate your situation as they're giving you the information you need, so that they can cushion the blow and things like that. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie 50-50. Doesn't matter if you have or you haven't. The plot of the movie is a guy's not feeling well. He goes to the doctor. Doctor runs some tests, comes back and says, yeah, you've got this kind of cancer. Your prognosis is 50-50. And see you later. Now, the dude who wrote the movie because that's basically what happened to him. He went to, he wasn't feeling well. He went to the doctor. Doctor, was just like absolutely robotic when it came to giving him the news that he had cancer and that he had a 50-50 survival rate. You can understand things from the doctor's perspective because he's got to give bad news to a lot of people, so he's not necessarily going to want to be emotional about it. But at the same time, if you're not responsive to your patient's emotional needs, you can lessen their odds of survival. And I saw the movie because me and a buddy. This will give you an idea how long ago it was. We rented it, and my buddy worked for a hospital. And, when the scene came on and the dude is like, the dude's told by the doctor, 50-50. And the doctor just, go see my receptionist and she'll schedule the appointments for chemotherapy or whatever. My buddy was like, oh, that would never happen. That's just not true at all. The doctors wouldn't do that. Well, I had already heard an interview with the guy who wrote the movie, and he said that, that was the moment that inspired him, obviously after he recovered from the chemo and everything else, to write the fucking movie because the doctor was a dick to him. I didn't mention that to my friend. And so that Realtor.com article, it gave me the spine because it helped me pull in all these other elements in such a way that it didn't matter how much shit Musk fucked up between, when I record this episode and when you listen to it, or, between the last time I put out an episode and this time. Because it reminded me of a number of different things. One of the first things that it reminded me of was an article by a college professor who, dude's a bit of a futurist. That's the best way I can describe him. And he got an invitation to speak at what he thought was a conference. Back in 2018, I think. And so the people hosting the conference were going to pay him a massive amount of money. He shows up to the conference, speaks for, a day or something like that, and he gets 6 months' salary at his university job. I mean, how the fuck can you turn that down? So he goes to what he thinks is a conference, and he quickly discovers it's just a handful of dudes who work for different hedge funds and private equity firms. So he's not going to be standing up in front of a large crowd and giving a talk. He's just sitting at a table surrounded by a bunch of, a dozen or so dudes. Now, this professor has prepped himself with all kinds of things about, where technology may be heading and stuff like that. So once he realizes that, it's not a conference, it's dudes from, who run some hedge funds and private equity funds. And if you're not familiar with hedge funds or private equity funds, just know that they are the scum of the fucking earth. Anyways, so they start asking him questions. And he realizes, these guys want to talk to me because they think civilization is going to collapse in the very near future. And they want to figure out how they can be the 21st century equivalent of feudal lords. And as you read this guy's piece about his experience, you realize these tech bros, which there's not much difference between private equity guys, hedge fund guys, and tech bros. In fact, there's a huge amount of overlap. They don't really grasp a lot of important facts about human society. You know, they're trying to figure out how they can be a feudal lord when all this shit implodes, but they're missing elements that feudal lords had. For example, and again, I'm linking, in this, you go to the show notes, you can read the article in its entirety. They're like, well, we've got our doomsday bunker compound, but how are we going to ensure that our security personnel are going to be loyal to us if money is worthless? Could we use shock collars to control them? Okay. So basically what these guys are envisioning is the line that comes to mind is something I heard about what life was like in the Balkans when, they imploded and were under sanctions. Somebody described it as Blade Runner meets the 14th century. Because you had cars that were running on the roads, but they were using what is known as producer gas. For those of you who are unfamiliar with producer gas, what producer gas is, or how it's made, is you take something like wood or coal, a solid object that could be burned, but you're not going to be burning it. You could burn it for fuel, but you're not going to be burning it for fuel. What you do is you heat the wood or the coal up to a high temperature, and it starts giving off gases. Some, not all, some of the gases given off will be hydrogen and methane. There's also water and CO2 and stuff like that. And what you do is you heat that, you heat your wood or your coal up, you get the gases off of it, and you run them into, say, an ordinary car engine instead of gasoline. And you can get it to work not very well, so it doesn't, say you've got a 100 horsepower engine, well, that's when it runs off gasoline. You run it off of producer gas, you can get maybe 75, if you're lucky, horsepower out of it using producer gas. Like I said, there's there was a guy in what was left of Yugoslavia in the 90s who ran Yugos off of that. During World War II, France, when they were occupied by the Germans, they had cars converted to run off of producer gas. They would heat up coal, it would give off the gases, and the cars would run. And I know about that because the Lane Motor Museum in Nashville has a Citroen that is from that era that is coal powered. It's maybe a 1942. Really neat looking car because it's your standard Citroen car from late 30s, early 40s, and then it's got these weird boxes on the front fenders. And that's where you put the coal in. The coal would be heated up to give off the producer gas, and that would be piped into the carburetor instead of gasoline, and then it would be sucked into the cylinders. The spark plugs would fire. That would be, give it a bang. Even under the best conditions, you're not going to get as much horsepower out of that engine as you would if you ran it on gasoline or diesel, if it was a diesel engine. And because of the other gases that are produced by heating up your coal or your wood, you get a lot of gunk that fucks up your engine later on. Right, so these hedge fund pricks were kind of thinking about a society like that. They'd have their doomsday bunker compound that they lived in. Mark Zuckerberg has bought a huge chunk of one of the Hawaiian Islands, and he's trying to turn that into his doomsday bunker. He wants it to be a self-sufficient farm. But they recognized, well, how can we keep our security personnel and our other personnel loyal to us when money will be useless at that point? Right? I mean, you can pay them in U.S. dollars, but if there's no U.S. government, what fucking good is that money? Also, if you can't go down to the store to buy a new TV or a new computer or groceries, what good is that fucking money, right? Because either it's too dangerous to go to those places or that shit's not available, right? A significant chunk of our electronics are not made in the United States. So the global trade system collapses. You're not buying a new TV because there aren't any, because we don't have the factories. We don't have ways to get new TVs, assuming the factories in Asia are still up and running, to the U.S. We just don't have those methods. So these guys are like, well, how can we keep our underlings loyal to us? And one of the ideas that they came up with was shock collars, right? So if your head of security decided, I don't like this asshole, he won't let me bring my wife or my girlfriend or my kids or whatever into the compound, and I don't want them to die, so I'm just going to kill this fucker. Well, this guy has a shock collar, so the, hedge fund zillionaire or whomever can hit a button and zap the guy or kill the guy, and that solves the problem. Well, except for the fact that you have to convince the guy to put the collar on first, right? And then it hit me, because I got to thinking about that article. In the mid-90s, Wired put out an article where this guy got invited to this weekend event, and he started talking to the people at the event, and they were all, the event was, hey, we're all gonna hang out on this rich guy's yacht. So dude goes to it, and these guys start explaining to him who they were. This is the mid-90s. They are folks who were influenced by Isaac Asimov's Foundation novel series. If you're not familiar with Isaac Asimov's Foundation novel series, if you know where to look, you can find a BBC audio production of it. The Apple TV Plus series with that title has some significant differences from what I've seen from the books. I haven't seen enough of that series to say, oh, well, it's so alien from the concept of the books that it's not worth watching. Essentially, the idea that Asimov had when he wrote the books was, what would it be like in the future when we're, fantastically advanced, if we were to have a situation equivalent to the Roman Empire collapsing. So, and Asimov's Foundation series, and I'm talking primarily about the trilogy, which forms the core. Later on, he would add to it, and then, the family after Asimov's death would hire other people to write books in that series. I haven't read anything other than what Asimov wrote. But the core of the Foundation series is that there's a guy named Harry Seldon who is a brilliant psychologist and mathematician. And he figures out that you can apply mathematics to predict the behavior of large groups of people or sentient beings, right? So he figures out that for reasons, that he plugs all the data he has into his formula, and he figures out, the Galactic Empire is going to collapse in the very near future. So we have two choices. If we do nothing, then the Dark Ages that will result from the Galactic Empire collapsing will last for tens of thousands of years. If, however, we create a foundation, hence the title of the series, where we track, we have an archive of all knowledge in the galaxy, we can cut the Dark Ages down to just 1,000 years. Now, in Asimov's work, there is no discussion of the possibility of avoiding the collapse of the Galactic Empire. And it has been so long since I've read the Foundation series, I can't remember if he actually directly addresses it or if it is just something seen as being inevitable. Why I bring this up is that in the BBC radio production of the Foundation series, which is the most recent version I've followed through completely. I've watched a few episodes of the Apple Plus TV series, and I just haven't gotten around to watching the rest of it. The BBC series, the folks, the characters in that are just slavishly dedicated to the idea of an empire and an emperor. They don't think, well, okay, the emperor, shit's gonna go turn bad, the empire's gonna fall. Hey, let's turn this whole thing into a galactic democracy. That never occurs to them. Maybe it's discussed in the books. I haven't read them since the 1980s. Maybe that's discussed in episodes of the Apple Plus TV series that I haven't watched yet. Don't know. Don't care. The point is that the people dude was talking about in the Wired article from the mid-90s were imitating that. And they had already assumed that at some point civilization is going to collapse and we need to preserve crucial knowledge. So at some point when civilization restarts, people don't have to struggle to figure shit out. And the guys who have the doomsday bunkers and who are the ones who had that college professor talk to them about how to survive the collapse of society. These people, despite the billions, if not trillions of dollars of wealth that they have access to, have already abandoned the idea of our society continuing. It vaguely reminds me of the planet of Magrathea in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, where, galactic civilization collapses, so the people who are able to make planets for the rich and wealthy, rather than trying to figure out how to, in the galactic depression that causes the collapse, are like, we're all just going to go into suspended animation until the galactic stock market is high enough to support our services. Right. So, guys like Musk and probably Bezos and any other billionaire you care to name, they've given up on the idea of our civilization, our society surviving for very much longer. They are trying to build compounds where they can survive. And they're trying to figure out how to, get us puppets to support them. Because there's all kinds of shit that they fucking cannot do. Right? And I have experience with people who are highly successful or wealthy. In 2001, I was tech support for a satellite phone company. Now, we had a variety of phones that we supported. Some of them were really complicated to operate. They were like the form factor for the phone was like a laptop computer. You had to flip the lid up. You had to point it in a certain direction at a certain time. And all that was based upon where you were on Earth. Others of them were little more complicated than your average cell phone in 2001, right? So these things would have a fancy antenna that you had to, fold up. And, once you got that antenna popped out, you could make a call like you were calling anybody from a cell phone at that time. Right? And the phones were in the $1,000 range at a minimum. Depending on the kind of phone you got, it would range from anywhere from around $1,000 to $10,000 or so. Your call, when you made it, if you were calling a ordinary landline or somebody's cell phone, the cost that you paid could range from, like 50 cents a minute to a couple of dollars a minute. Somebody calling you, their costs could range from a couple of dollars a minute to like $15 a minute. It just depended upon certain complexities, such as the kind of phone, the kind of satellite phone that you had, who was calling you, where they were calling you from, or who you were calling, or where you were calling from. So, anyways, as tech support, I would have to, handle the issues that people had when they got these phones. And, it wasn't poor people renting these phones. Danny DeVito was one of our customers, as was a couple others, minor celebrities whom you may or may not have heard of, but I'm sure most of you have heard of Danny DeVito. So, it wasn't somebody out there making minimum wage. And so, as tech support, these people would call me with the problems. And the wealthiest folks, or the folks who were an executive at a company, had the hardest time understanding the kind of shit that anybody who operated a cell phone in 2001 would have figured out. I will never forget, I got a call from somebody, and they're going, well, we can't get a signal. And so I'm like, well, what kind of phone? And I pull up their information. I'm like, okay, you've got an Iridium 9500 phone. Have you tried dialing this on the keypad? And they're like, I don't see the keypad. And it took me several minutes, and I was like, oh, is the phone still in the holster? And they're like, yes, it is. I says, okay, well, you need to take the phone out of the holster. Right? And the Iridium 9500 satellite phone, if you've never seen one, is like the World War II or Korean era phones that the military had. That's the kind of size, I mean, it's or like similar to the first generation cell phones, but wider, right? And so the lady takes the phone out of the holster, and I said, now you should see this thing that you can flip down. She goes, oh, yeah, okay. She goes, but I'm not getting any signal. And I ask her, are you outside? And she says, yes, I'm outside, because at that time, the particular Iridium phones did not work if you were inside a building. And I said, okay, do you have the antenna deployed? And she's like, antenna? And I says, yes, on the back of the phone, you'll see a long tube, and as you pull it and turn it, it will extend, and it'll kind of look like a gun when it's fully deployed. And she, and I hear, Oh, it does look like a gun because, again, an Iridium 9500 phone, the satellite antenna on the back of the thing, was about an inch in diameter, and then it got a signal, and then she could figure, and I says, now, when you want to call somebody, you have to hit the country code, and she's like, and the woman was like, well, what's the country code for America? And I says, it's one. We invented the phone system, so we got to pick our number, and it's one. Canada's the same way, and I says, there should be somewhere in the stuff we sent with that phone, a listing to tell you the country code, but you dial the country code, then the area code, and then, the number. And it's like, okay. I ran into that all the time. And it was always people who had shitloads of money. The folks who were the secretaries or the executive assistants, they never had any questions because they would read the manual. And when I say manual, you'd get like a 3-page quick start guide that would explain everything to you, and then you'd get the factory manual, which was the size of a standard paperback book. If the phone went to the executive assistant or somebody along those lines, never had any issues. It was only when you dealt with somebody who was really wealthy and, they would not allow their executive assistants or whomever underneath them to touch such a thing, that I had issues and had to deal with that bullshit. Right? And I mean, you would think that some of these people would have an understanding of at least how a cell phone works, right? Because some of these satellite phones were really complicated. I mean, you had to have, like I said, you had a laptop or some other thing, and you had to do kinds of, specific careful orientations, and anybody calling you had to have a special access number. Others of them really weren't any different than your average cell phone. In fact, some of them, and this again is in 2001, were set up so that you could have it if you were in the area where your cell phone provider's network was available, it would use that automatically to make a call. And if you were outside a cell service, it would automatically switch to satellite, which 20 some odd years later is a thing that Apple and Android are now just starting to be able to do. And over the years, it's a thing that I've learned that average people know how to do in their day-to-day life. Your celebrity or your wealthy executive doesn't understand. There are people who, they just... I'm not calling them stupid. I'm just saying that in order for them to be who they are, they have to sacrifice knowing about things the average person would take for granted. Right? So that's guys like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel. They have these grandiose ideas that they're going to be, the 21st century version of Alexander the Great or, some fucking emperor. There is a series, and I don't have it linked in the show notes, and I'm not going to look it up. The Behind the Bastards podcast did a series on Mark Zuckerberg, and Zuckerberg, I think it's Marcus Aurelius. There is some Roman emperor that he is consciously trying to model himself after because he wants to be the 21st century version of that particular emperor. And Peter Thiel, that dude has all kinds of fucking issues which are really, really bad. Peter Thiel, and I do have this linked in the show notes to the first episode of the multi-part Behind the Bastards series on him, which I recommend listening to him. Peter Thiel is a guy who was born in Germany in the 60s, right? And his family moves shortly, excuse me, after he was born to South Africa, right? And dude grows up in South Africa. A German growing up in South Africa, right? And his parents were, they probably said, oh, between 1933 and 45, we were not in Germany. We were on vacation in Switzerland, and we had no idea what was going on in Germany. I mean, no, his parents were fucking Nazis. And so he grows up in South Africa, and then when apartheid falls, or about the time the rest of the world starts clamping down on South Africa because enough people say, this apartheid shit is bullshit, so let's just sanction them and boycott them. Dude comes to the U.S., and he goes to Stanford, I think. You know, it's a very expensive and prestigious university. Peter Thiel is a gay man. And in the time when he was at Stanford, which would have been the mid to late 80s, he published a conservative student newspaper that was an alternative to the campus newspaper. And he didn't write it, but he happily published an essay in that student paper of his that was basically like, well, yeah, AIDS is a good thing because it's killing all them gay people. Peter Thiel was gay. Peter Thiel, at that point in time, knew he was gay. So he wasn't somebody in denial about his homosexuality. He knew he was gay, accepted it, kept it hidden for most people. But his attitude was, well, yeah, if you're gay and you're fucking a lot of people, you deserve to die from a nasty disease. Right? And I need to point out, Peter Thiel is a devout Catholic. The cognitive dissonance involved in that is huge. Anyways, so Peter Thiel, he goes on to start the company that would later become known as PayPal. And as part of starting up PayPal, they buy up a company Elon Musk is involved in. And when they decide that Elon Musk is a little too bugfuck for them, they buy Elon out and kick him to the curb. Of course, that enables Elon to go on to buy Tesla and SpaceX and all kinds of other shit. Why I bring this up is that Peter Thiel is currently going around Silicon Valley and trying to sell the tech bros on the idea of God. See, Thiel, unlike Musk, has figured out you need religion to control and manipulate the masses. And Peter Thiel is this really fucked up kind of Catholic who like Mel Gibson, thinks that anything the Catholic Church has done after Vatican II, including Vatican II, is satanic. Peter Thiel, despite all this, got married to another man who later died under mysterious circumstances. No, I'm not accusing Peter Thiel of murdering his spouse. I'm just saying that his spouse died under mysterious circumstances. Maybe it was a suicide, or maybe somebody murdered that spouse as a way to get to Peter Thiel. Or maybe, Peter Thiel had that spouse killed. I don't know. I'm not claiming anything. I'm just saying, you look at the facts, seems like there's something more going on. Who could have been responsible for the death of Peter Thiel's husband? Don't know. Honestly, don't really fucking care, right? But Peter Thiel is trying to sell people in Silicon Valley, the tech bros, specifically on the idea of God. Well, why would he do that? Maybe he actually is a devout Catholic and he really believes the bullshit of religion. Or, possibility, he realizes that you can control people using religion even when money is worthless. And there are other people in Silicon Valley who think that AI systems will somehow enable us to talk to God. Again, article in the show notes. You can read it yourself. I just think of, excuse me, but why does God need a starship? But anyways, another thing I want to point out, and again, there's a link in the show notes to an article from a credible source. Microsoft did a study about the impact on humans who spend a lot of time with AI. And Microsoft discovered that, if you're somebody who relies on AI a lot, you lose your ability to do things like critical thinking. Now, I need to point out, you'll notice that none of the companies who are pushing AI have said, maybe we should dial back on this. Or maybe we should give people guidance on how best to use AI so they don't suffer a loss of critical thinking. Why would you do that? Well, yeah, okay, sure. It cut into your profit margins if you said to people, hey, don't use this shit as much. But also you'd create a population that is easier to manipulate. So, I've got to get out of here. I know I've just barely crossed the hour threshold, but it's 2 a.m. here. I've got to get to bed because I've got shit I've got to do. But I hope you folks can see why I am concerned about a lot of shit and why things that Elon is doing to the U.S. government are far more dangerous than it appears, even if you are well versed in the fuckery that he's presently doing. As soon as I can, I will get out a Patreon episode where I can be more open about certain things. For everybody else, the next episode I will put out, which we'll see how things go as far as what time I have available to me. It will be Hexenhammer. After that, I'm not sure what kind of structure things will take as far as the news episodes go. And we'll just have to see. This will be explained on the Patreon only episodes as to why there may not be any more Hexenhammer, or there may still be Hexenhammer episodes, and as to what shape the various news episodes may take. I will talk to all of you then.